Right there at my granddaughter's graduation party, in the backyard of the house I paid $480,000 for. My daughter handed me a folding chair and a tray of dirty plates and told me the caterer's table was for family, not for the help. My own daughter looked me in the eye and said, "Dad, if you can't act like you belong here, maybe you should just work the party instead." Then she pinned an apron to my chest like she was decorating a scarecrow. But I am still the man whose name is on that deed. So when the last guest left that night, I made one phone call, and by sunrise, the house that had never belonged to her was no longer hers to stand in. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you're the kind of person who believes family should be earned, not owed, I'd love to know what state are you watching from tonight. Just drop it in the comments below. Note that this story contains fictional elements written for entertainment purposes, and any resemblance to real people is coincidental, though I hope the lesson underneath it isn't. My daughter pinned that apron to my chest like she was decorating a scarecrow, and I have not been able to stop thinking about the sound the pin made when it clicked shut. Not loud, barely a sound at all, but I heard it the way you hear a bone set wrong. I want to tell you how a man ends up standing in his own backyard, in his own house, wearing an apron his daughter handed him like a costume. Because it didn't start there. Betrayal never starts where you find it. It starts somewhere warm, somewhere you'd swear on your life was safe. My name is Frank Delacroix. I'm 62 years old. For 36 years, I worked the rail yards outside Scranton, Pennsylvania. First as a brakeman, then a conductor, then a yardmaster, who knew every switch and siding on that line better than I knew the veins in my own hands. It's not glamorous work. Nobody writes movies about yardmasters. But it's honest work, and it pays if you're patient, and you don't waste what you earn. I was patient. I didn't waste. My wife's name was Loretta. She taught second grade at St. Boniface for 29 years, and she had this laugh that started low in her chest and climbed until it filled a room, and I used to tell her that laugh was the only alarm clock I ever needed, because some mornings she'd start laughing at something on the radio before I was even fully awake, and I'd open my eyes just to watch her do it. We had one daughter, Melissa. Loretta used to say Melissa had my stubbornness and her impatience, which she claimed was the worst possible combination a child could inherit, though she said it with so much love in her voice that it never sounded like a complaint. Loretta was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's in the spring of 2017. She was 59. I won't describe every year of what came after, because some of it belongs only to the two of us, in that house on Larkspur Court. In the small hours when she'd wake up frightened and not know my face, and I'd sit with her until she did. What I'll tell you is this. I did not put her in a facility until I physically could not lift her anymore, until the doctor sat me down and told me that loving her the way I wanted to love her was going to put both of us in the ground. She passed in November of 2023, in a care home in Clark Summit, on a Thursday, with rain coming down sideways against the window. I was holding her hand. Melissa was on a plane, delayed out of Charlotte, and did not make it in time. That is all I'll say about that day. What came after was the arithmetic of a life. 36 years with the railroad, a pension that had grown fat and slow like a good tomato left too long on the vine, savings Loretta and I had built dollar by dollar because neither of us trusted the stock market further than we could throw it. I sold the house on Larkspur Court, the one where Melissa grew up, because every room in it held a version of Loretta I couldn't live inside anymore. Between the pension payout, the savings, and the sale of that house, I had $480,000, every cent earned, no debt attached to a single dollar of it. I bought a house on Hollow Ridge Lane outside Clark Summit in February of 2024, paid cash. The closing agent slid the paperwork across the table, and I remember my hand shook a little when I signed, not from doubt, but from the strange, heavy feeling of finally arriving somewhere you spent your whole life walking toward. It was a stone and cedar colonial, 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and a backyard that sloped gently down toward a line of old maples. There was a patch of soil near the back fence, dark and soft, that reminded me of the raised beds Loretta used to keep, where she grew tomatoes and too much zucchini every August and gave half of it away to neighbors who stopped asking for it and started just accepting their fate. Melissa drove up from Harrisburg the week after I closed. She was 37 then, married to a man named Curtis who worked in commercial insurance, with 2 kids, my grandchildren, Ava and a younger boy named Theo. Melissa walked through every room of that house with her hand trailing along the walls like she was checking it was real. When we stood together on the back porch, looking down that slope toward the maples, She leaned her head against my shoulder the way she used to when she was small enough for me to carry on my hip. "Mom would have loved this," she said. "I know," I told her. She turned and hugged me then, a real hug, the kind that goes on a beat longer than you expect. And when she pulled back, her eyes were wet, and she didn't wipe them. "You spent your whole life taking care of us, Dad, taking care of Mom. Now it's our turn. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, we're here. I promise you that." I believed her. I want to be clear about that, because I know how this sounds now, looking backward. I am not a man who's easily fooled. I spent 36 years reading crews, reading dispatchers, reading men who'd tell you the couplings were secure while their eyes told you otherwise. I know the difference between a person performing love and a person who means it. My daughter meant it, standing on that porch. I would stake every year I have left on that, which is exactly what makes the 2 years that followed so hard to make sense of. Because the cruelest turns are never the ones wearing a warning label. They're the ones that start with your daughter's head on your shoulder and a promise she fully intended to keep on the day she made it. For the first 8 months on Hollow Ridge Lane, life was quiet in a way I hadn't felt since before Loretta got sick. I planted tomatoes near the back fence, not because I love gardening, but because I needed something green and stubborn to keep alive. Melissa and Curtis brought the kids up most Sundays. Ava was 9, all elbows and questions, and she'd climb onto the stool at my kitchen island and ask me to make pancakes shaped like her name, which is a request no man can fulfill with a spatula, but I tried anyway, and she laughed at the attempts more than she would have at success. Theo was 6, quieter, and he liked to sit on the porch steps beside me in the evenings and ask why the streetlights came on by themselves. I told him it was magic, and Melissa told him it was a sensor, and Theo believed me, which I considered a small personal victory. Somewhere around month 9, the visits changed shape. It was small at first, the kind of small you forgive, because forgiving is easier than naming it. Melissa started arriving with grocery bags she'd leave in my kitchen without asking, filling my refrigerator with things she and Curtis liked, rearranging my pantry to make more sense, she said. She started bringing her book club to my house on Thursday evenings because, in her words, "Your living room has better light than ours." I didn't mind, not at first. I told myself it was nice, having the house full, having voices in the rooms again. But the requests kept layering. Could I watch the kids on Tuesdays because daycare fell through? Could I drive Ava to soccer because Curtis had a client dinner? Could Melissa borrow the truck, the good chairs, the folding tables in the garage? Could I host Curtis's work colleagues for a dinner because their own dining room was under renovation? A renovation that, as far as I could tell, consisted of a single swatch of paint taped to a wall for 4 months running. By the spring of this year, Melissa had a key to my house that I did not remember giving her. She had started referring to Hollow Ridge Lane, in conversation with her friends, as our family house, which struck me as an odd phrase for a house I'd paid $480,000 in cash to own outright, alone, and, as a widower, rebuilding a life. I let it go. I told myself that language is loose, that families share things, that Loretta would have wanted the house full of grandchildren and noise, rather than quiet and me. Then came the graduation party. Ava was finishing 5th grade, moving up to middle school, and Melissa decided this deserved what she called a real celebration. Not just cake at their place in Harrisburg, but a full backyard party at Hollow Ridge Lane, because, she told me over the phone, with a laugh I used to love and was starting to hear differently, "Your yard is just so much better for this, Dad. It's basically made for it." I said yes. Of course I said yes. It was my granddaughter, finishing elementary school, and I would have handed over the keys to anything I owned for one more excuse to watch Ava laugh in that yard the way Loretta used to laugh in hers. What I did not expect was to become staff at my own party. Melissa arrived 3 hours early with Curtis, 2 coolers, 4 folding tables from a rental company, and a woman named Deb from her book club, who apparently did event planning on the side. I watched them take over my kitchen counter with a laminated schedule. I watched Curtis move my patio furniture to the garage without asking, replacing it with rented white folding chairs because, as Melissa explained, "My old stuff photograph's kinda sad, Dad." No offense. I stood in my own kitchen holding a spatula, watching a woman I'd met 20 minutes earlier direct traffic through my house, and I told myself, again, that this was for Ava, that grandfathers absorb these things. By 4 o'clock, 30 people I mostly didn't know filled my backyard. Curtis's business partners, Melissa's book club, neighbors from their street in Harrisburg who'd never once set foot in Clark's Summit before that afternoon. I moved through the crowd trying to find my footing, trying to locate the version of this party where I was Ava's grandfather and not simply the man whose address had been useful. I found Ava by the dessert table and knelt down to hug her, and for a moment everything felt like it was supposed to. She hugged me back hard, told me she'd picked out the cupcakes herself, chocolate with the little fondant graduation caps, and I told her I was proud of her, and for a few seconds the whole strange afternoon fell away. Then Melissa found me. "Dad, there you are." She had a clipboard. An actual clipboard, the kind I hadn't seen since my last performance review at the yard before I retired. The caterer just texted, "She's stuck behind an accident on 81, won't be here for another 40 minutes, and people are already asking about food." "That's rough," I said. "Want me to call her? See if there's a shortcut?" "No, I need you on the grill. You're good at it, and honestly it'll look more homey than some catering company logo everywhere anyway." She said this fast, already turning away, already moving toward the next item on her clipboard, as though she'd handed me a compliment instead of an assignment. I want to be honest with you. Grilling at a party isn't an insult on its own. I've manned a grill at 100 family gatherings and never thought twice about it. What happened next is the part that changed the shape of the whole afternoon. I walked toward the patio and found that the good folding chairs, the ones from the rental company, had all been arranged around the tables for the guests. My chairs, the plain aluminum ones from my own garage, the ones Curtis had moved out that morning, had been set up near the grill itself, off to the side, angled slightly away from the party, facing the fence. I stood there a moment, working it out slowly, the way you work out a word in a language you don't fully speak. Then Melissa walked past with a tray of dirty plates from the appetizer table and set the tray down on the aluminum chair nearest me. "Can you take these to the kitchen when you get a second?" "And Dad," she paused, looking at my shirt, a pale blue button-down I'd put on that morning because it was Ava's day and I wanted to look nice for the pictures. "You're going to get grease on that. Here." She reached into the tote bag on her shoulder and pulled out an apron, white with a faded coffee stain near the hem, the kind of apron you'd find balled up in the bottom of a catering box, and before I fully understood what was happening, she'd looped it over my neck and was tying the strings behind my back like I was 7 years old, and she was helping me get ready for school. "Melissa." I stepped back. The apron strings pulled loose and hung down one side. "What are you doing?" "I'm keeping your shirt clean, Dad, relax." She laughed, but it wasn't the laugh from the porch. It wasn't Loretta's laugh passed down through her. It was thinner than that, distracted, aimed somewhere over my shoulder at a guest she was already scanning the yard for. "I don't need an apron at my own party." Something in my voice must have carried further than I meant it to, because a few heads turned near the drink table. Melissa's face did something quick and sharp. Embarrassment, maybe, or the fear of embarrassment, which in my experience is often worse. She lowered her voice, but not by much. "Dad, please, not now. Look, everyone's watching. Can we not do this? You said you'd help with the party." "I said I'd help. I didn't say I'd work it." "It's the same thing." She said it fast, automatic, the way you say something you've believed for a while without ever examining it. "Someone has to run the grill. Someone has to bust the tables. The caterer's stuck. And you're standing here in a house you barely use except to host things for us anyway. So I don't really see the problem with pitching in for one afternoon." I felt those words land somewhere under my ribs and stay there. A house I barely use. As though the 8 months I'd spent alone in those rooms, grieving in a kitchen too big for one man, planting tomatoes for a wife who'd never see them bloom, amounted to nothing more than storage space for her convenience. "This is my house, Melissa. I know it's your house, Dad. Nobody's arguing that. I'm asking you to help at a party for your granddaughter. If you can't act like you belong here today, without making it a whole thing, maybe you should just work the party instead. It'd honestly be easier for everyone." I looked at her for what felt like a long time. Long enough that Curtis noticed from across the yard and started walking over, the particular walk of a man sensing a scene he'd rather avoid. Long enough that Deb from the book club suddenly found something urgent to do with the centerpieces. Long enough that I heard, very clearly, the small metallic click of the safety pin Melissa used to fasten the loose apron strap, pinning it to my shirt like she was decorating a scarecrow for a fall festival, her fingers quick and businesslike, not looking at my face while she did it. I did not say anything else. I want you to understand that this was not me being weak. I have stood on rail platforms in January wind that could take the skin off your knuckles and not flinched. I have delivered bad news to men twice my size without my voice shaking. What kept me quiet in that backyard was not fear. It was 36 years of reading a situation clearly enough to know that the worst thing I could do, for Ava's sake, on Ava's day, he was turn her graduation party into the scene her mother was clearly braced for. So I wore the apron, I manned the grill. I bussed the dirty plates to the kitchen, alone. While 30 strangers ate off rented chairs in my backyard and my daughter refilled wine glasses and laughed her thin, distracted laugh at things Curtis's business partners said. I watched Ava open presents on the back porch, and when she caught my eye and waved, I waved back with a hand that still smelled like lighter fluid. And I told myself, one more time, that this was for her. The party ended a little after 8. Guests trickled out in 2s and 3s, leaving paper plates crushed into the grass and half-full cups sweating rings onto my patio table. Melissa and Curtis stayed behind to help clean up, which turned out to mean standing in my kitchen drinking the last of the good wine while I carried folding tables back to the rental company's truck by myself, my knees reminding me, at every trip, that I was 62 years old and had spent the day doing physical work I hadn't agreed to. When the last guest's car pulled out of the driveway, Melissa found me on the back porch. I'd taken off the apron finally and left it folded on the porch railing like something I wanted to be rid of but didn't want to seem dramatic about discarding. That went well, I think, she said, leaning against the doorframe, a wine glass still in her hand. Ava had a great time. I'm glad, I said, and I meant it. That much was true even through everything else. You okay? You got kinda quiet toward the end. I turned to look at her. Somewhere behind her, in the kitchen, Curtis was on his phone, laughing at something. Oblivious. The way men who've never had to notice things sometimes stay oblivious their whole lives. Melissa, I want to ask you something, and I want a real answer. Okay. She straightened up a little. Do you think of this as my house? Or do you think of it as the family's house? She was quiet for a second too long. Dad, that's such a weird question. Obviously it's your house, legally. Legally. I repeated the word back to her slowly, tasting the shape of it. But not really. Is that what you're telling me? I'm not telling you anything. I'm just saying, come on, families share things. That's what families do. You've got 4 bedrooms, and it's just you here. You act like it's some kind of betrayal that we use the space. I don't mind you using the space, Melissa. I minded being handed an apron and told to work my own granddaughter's party like I was hired help. I minded my good porch furniture disappearing into the garage so it wouldn't photograph, in your words, sad. I minded being told that if I couldn't, quote, act like I belong here, I should work the party instead. Her face went through several things quickly and I watched all of them. Surprise, then defensiveness, then something that looked almost like contempt, though I think, even now, she'd deny that's what it was. You're really doing this tonight? After everything I did to make today special for your granddaughter, you want to make it about your feelings? I want to make it about the truth, I said, which is that somewhere in the last 8 months, you and Curtis started treating this house like it belongs to all of us equally, when it doesn't. I paid for every board and every nail in this place with money I earned over 36 years, and with money your mother and I saved together before she got sick, and I will not stand in my own backyard wearing an apron someone pinned to my chest like a scarecrow, while my daughter tells me to act like I belong somewhere I own outright. Oh, here we go. The martyr speech. Everything you sacrificed. The great and noble Frank Delacroix. S.A.A. Don't. My voice came out harder than I intended, but I didn't take it back. Don't do that. Don't turn 36 years of getting up before dawn into a punchline because it's inconvenient for you tonight. Curtis appeared in the doorway then, sensing, correctly, that whatever was happening had crossed some threshold. Everything okay out here? No, I said, before Melissa could answer for both of them. It's not. I think you two should head home. It's late. The kids are probably tired. Melissa's jaw tightened. Fine, we'll go. But you know what, Dad? This whole night, you standing out here acting wounded because you had to flip some burgers, it's a little much. Mom would be embarrassed, honestly, watching you make a scene over an apron. I felt that one land exactly where she meant it to. She knew, better than almost anyone alive, which words would find the softest part of me, and she used her mother's name to do it, deliberately, the way you reach for the sharpest tool in a drawer when you want to do real damage fast. I didn't answer her. I watched them gather the children, half asleep in the car by then, and I watched the taillights disappear down Hollow Ridge Lane. And I stood on that porch for a long time afterward with the folded apron still sitting on the railing, and I thought about my wife and what she would have actually thought, watching her daughter pin an apron to her husband's chest and call it help. I did not sleep much that night. What I did instead was go into the study, the room I still hadn't fully unpacked, and pull out the folder where I kept every document connected to that house. The deed, the closing statement, the insurance policy, which listed me, and only me, as the sole named owner and resident. I sat at the desk until nearly 3 in the morning, reading through paperwork I already knew by heart, not because I needed the information, but because I needed to remind myself, in black and white, that none of what had happened that day had any legal bearing on what was actually true. This house was mine. Every board, every nail, every inch of soil where I'd planted tomatoes for a woman who'd never taste them. Mine. The following Tuesday, I called my attorney, a woman named Priscilla Odom, who'd handled the closing on Hollow Ridge Lane, and who I trusted the way you trust someone who's never once told you what you wanted to hear, instead of what was true. I told her everything, the key I hadn't given Melissa, the phrase, our family house, the apron, all of it. She listened without interrupting, the way good lawyers do. And when I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Frank, I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think before you answer. What do you actually want here? Do you want to set a boundary, or do you want something more permanent? I thought about the question longer than she probably expected me to. I thought about Loretta, about the tomatoes, about Ava's laugh at the dessert table, about the sound that safety pin made, clicking shut against my chest. And I thought about 36 years of showing up before sunrise for people who never once had to ask themselves whether I'd be there. I want them to understand, I finally said. That kindness isn't the same thing as ownership. I gave that family every door in this house standing open. I never once locked them out of anything, but somewhere along the way, my daughter decided that an open door means the house stopped being mine. I need her to understand it never stopped. Not for one single day. Priscilla drew up 2 things that week. The first was simple, a formal, written notice, delivered by certified mail, revoking the spare key and any informal access Melissa believed she had to the property, along with a clear, unambiguous statement that Hollow Ridge Lane remained my sole residence and was not, and had never been, family property in any legal sense. The second was less simple and took longer, and involved a conversation with my financial advisor about a trust I'd been circling in my mind since Loretta passed, but had never quite finished. One that would ensure that whatever happened to that house, whoever eventually inherited it, would inherit it on terms I set, not terms assumed on my behalf by someone standing in my kitchen with a clipboard. The notice arrived at Melissa's house on a Friday. She called me 40 minutes after I assumed the mail carrier came, her voice pitched somewhere between disbelief and fury. Dad, what is this? A certified letter? Are you serious right now? I'm completely serious. You're revoking my key over an apron? I'm revoking your key, I said. And I kept my voice level. The same voice I used to use calming down conductors mid-shift when a coupling failed and panic wanted to take over the platform, because somewhere in the last year, you stopped asking to use this house and started assuming you were entitled to it. The apron wasn't the cause, Melissa. It was the moment I finally saw the pattern clearly enough to name it. So what, I'm just banned now? From my own father's house? After everything I do for you? You're not banned. You're welcome here anytime, the way any guest is welcome, which means you call first, and you don't bring 30 strangers into my backyard and hand me an apron like I work here. There's a difference between a daughter and a landlord's tenant, and I think somewhere along the way you forgot which one I am to you. She hung up on me. I let her. Some silences need to be earned before they can be repaired, and I understood that whatever came next between us would take longer than a phone call to fix, if it could be fixed at all. 3 weeks passed. Quiet ones. I finished the trust with Priscilla, worked in the garden, watched the tomatoes I'd planted in Loretta's memory finally start to blush red along the vine. Ava called me twice on her own, using Melissa's old phone, just to tell me about a book she was reading, and to ask, in a small voice that broke my heart a little, why Grandma Loretta's tomatoes were the only thing at my house that hadn't changed. Melissa did not call. It was Curtis, in the end, who reached out first, in early August, asking if we could meet, just the 2 of us, for coffee. I agreed, mostly because I wanted to understand what he understood, and because some part of me hoped he might carry a version of sense back to Melissa that she wasn't ready to hear directly from me yet. We sat in a diner off Route 6, and Curtis, to his credit, didn't waste time. "Frank, I owe you an apology. I should have said something that day. When Melissa handed you that apron, I saw your face, and I knew it was wrong, and I didn't say anything, because I didn't want to be in the middle of it. I appreciate you saying that now. She's been a mess since the letter came. Not angry anymore, not really. Just, I think, scared. I think some part of her thought the house had kind of become ours by default, because you never said otherwise. And then all at once you did, in the most formal way possible, and I think it scared her more than the apron ever scared you." I turned my coffee cup slowly on the table, thinking about how to say what I wanted to say. "Curtis, I spent 36 years building something for my family. One shift, one paycheck at a time. I buried my wife. I paid $480,000, cash, for a house I hoped would be full of my grandchildren's laughter for the rest of my life. None of that means I stopped being a person with boundaries the day I hand someone a key. I was happy to share that house. I was never willing to disappear inside it." Curtis nodded slowly, looking down at his own coffee. "I'll talk to her. I think she needs to hear it from you, though, really hear it." That conversation came 2 weeks later, on my back porch. The same porch where she'd once told me now it's our turn to take care of you. The same porch where I'd once believed her completely. She came alone this time. No clipboard, no wine glass, just her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee I'd made her, sitting across from me in one of the aluminum chairs from the garage, the plain ones, the ones that weren't good enough to photograph. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, "about what you said, about the difference between a daughter and a tenant." "I know. And I think I got confused somewhere. I think after Mom died, and then you bought this place, I think I started thinking of it as this second chance for our family, this house that would just always be here, always available, always yours to give. And somewhere in there I stopped seeing it as something you built. I started seeing it as something we were owed, because you're our dad, and dads are just supposed to provide, forever, without it costing them anything." I let that sit in the air a moment before I answered. "Your mother used to say a house isn't a home until something's growing in it. I've spent 2 years growing something here, Melissa. Not just tomatoes. A life I could actually stand to live, after losing her. I need you to understand that when I opened this house to your family, I wasn't opening a hotel. I was opening my home, which is a different thing, and it comes with the expectation that the people inside it see me, not just the space I provide." Her eyes filled, and this time she didn't hide it. "I'm sorry, Dad. I really am. I don't want to be someone who pins an apron to my father's chest and calls it help. I don't want Ava growing up thinking that's what family looks like." I reached across the small table between us and took her hand, the same hand I used to hold crossing streets in Scranton 30 years earlier. "Then let's make sure she doesn't. We didn't fix everything on that porch in one afternoon. Trust, once it cracks, takes longer to reset than a single conversation, no matter how honest." But I gave her back a key, eventually, on my own terms, with a conversation first about what that key meant. I kept the trust with Priscilla exactly as written, because boundaries you draw out of love don't need to be erased the moment the person you drew them for finally understands why you drew them. Ava still calls to tell me about her books. The tomatoes still come in heavy and red every August. And this year, for the first time, Melissa asked if she could learn how to grow her own, in a patch behind her house in Harrisburg, so that Ava would grow up knowing where food actually comes from, and what it costs a person to grow something worth keeping. I think about that click of the safety pin sometimes, late at night, the way you think about a sound that changed something in you. I don't regret the party. I don't even regret the apron. Not really. Because without it, I don't know how long I would have let the pattern continue unnamed. What I know now, sitting on this porch most evenings with a cup of coffee and a view of a yard that is, undeniably, unmistakably, still mine, is that the people who love you the most will sometimes forget, without meaning any real harm by it, that what you've built for them was never obligation. It was a gift. And a gift, once it's mistaken for a debt owed, needs someone brave enough, and tired enough, and finally clear-eyed enough to remind everyone involved exactly whose name is on the deed.